Ladies, gentlemen, and haradrim of all ages, next week we've got the PTR coming for Season 7 for Diablo 4, and with this we have at least the majority of the groundwork of what the season is going to look like when it hits in January. Obviously, changes will be made after the fact from these notes based on feedback from the PTR itself, but this will give us a strong indication of the intended feeling of the next season and their goals for class balance too. Today we had the release of the full patch notes for the PTR, and so while we've talked about what has been already revealed publicly, today we're going to go over any specific highlights from the full patch notes that haven't been talked about until this time, starting with a class-based focus, of course. For Spiritborn, there is a ton of general balance changes going on, and generally increasing the power of the lesser used skills. The most major of these is Stinger gaining base damage, and Enhanced Stinger also being buffed too, Invasive Payback having its cooldown nearly halved so you can take advantage of its special effect more often, Razor Wings now having 15 maximum active at a time instead of 12, which is honestly a great buff for that skill too. Velocity was buffed to no longer require recent damage done, Acceleration has become significantly more usable and powerful, now only giving a maximum of 1 extra evade charge, but the post-evade Eagle skill damage buff now lasts for 2 seconds after you evade, instead of only on the first skill used after evading. Then we have the rank 5 ultimate bonuses for Spiritborn. The Protector does 100% of your Thorns damage to enemies in its radius each second. The Seeker's damage is double dip scaled with 50% of your crit damage and vulnerable damage bonuses combined, which could actually get quite nuts. The Hunter's initial damage executes non-bosses, and the Devourer's damage is increased by 150% of your healing received bonus. The biggest possible impact of this are the Seeker having a proper main damage focus build. I tried making one of these myself around the Evade build in Season 6, but this will be much stronger than that one was in theory. Then we had a couple of changes to Spirit Hall options. Centipede Primary now reduces damage less than it used to, but also applies poisoning after every hit that you do, which does give it quite a bit more potential to meld with other actual builds, and is something that we asked for quite a bit as the Spiritborn player base. As well, the Eagle Secondary Bonus's crit chance bonus now lasts for 4 seconds after getting a critical hit, instead of only after 2. But I expected to still see limited use generally outside of perhaps now with Harmony of Ebawaka and enabling the Acceleration passive after its changes. Then we had some reworks to Tempers 2, with the two main ones here being that Razor Wings' chance to be cast twice has been replaced with chance for double damage, which makes more sense due to there being a limited amount that can exist at a time. And then also Maximum Resolve Stacks Temper has been completely executed, replaced with Armor plus %, which honestly should make unyielding hits far more usable as an aspect and easier to achieve maximum benefit for most builds as well. Outside of this, there were a bunch of legendary aspect changes too, the ones of major note in my opinion being Acceleration, the aspect that grants bonus evade charges with lucky hit chance, no longer requires enemies to be vulnerable for its effect, and has had its lucky hit chance activation increased by a good deal too, which bodes quite well for potential evade builds in Season 7. The aspect of Tenacity now is able to overfill you on Resolve, which is the main way to gain Resolve stacks above the maximum now that the temper for it is gone, so it may have gained some use. And then the aspect of Deflection now properly deflects Razor Wings in a spiral with the invasive Razor Wings upgrade selected. Then we also had changes for uniques too, the most meaningful one being the Band of First Breath now giving a multiplicative damage bonus instead of resource generation. Then the largest paragon change for the class 2 is to the Bitter Medicine legendary node, which now does poisoning damage and gives you multiplicative increased poison damage to enemies every time that you heal for 100% of your maximum life. It no longer scales infinitely with the healing received stat bonus, which is a bit awkward for comboing with the new rank 5 Devourer bonus, but this is definitely a more interesting paragon node overall. Moving on, we have changes for Barbarian, starting with a big improvement for Furious Hammer of the Ancients, giving it a heavily scaling crit damage bonus to go along with the crit chance bonus it gives too. Then of course the major rank 5 ultimate skill increases at rank 5. Wrath of the Berserker now pulls enemies in, which is great, and it also deals some damage too. Call of the Ancients now counts as summons, but also you gain 40% move speed and 20% distant enemy damage reduction while it is active, and then Iron Maelstrom gets up to 80% damage increase from your injured and healthy enemy damage bonuses, which is a new source of infinite scaling for the class, but with a relatively limited stat. As for passives, Heavy Hitter now also affects Earthquakes and Dust Devils, and in legendary aspects it synergizes a fair amount further too, with not only most Earthquake aspects gaining multiplicative damage increases for Earthquakes if you have them equipped, but the Executioner's aspect specifically gaining 25% increased Earthquake damage for every 100 strength that you have, which is a massive scaling opportunity for Earthquake Barbarian builds. Outside of this, the main changes were to Paragon legendary nodes, specifically Bonebreaker, now also increases ultimate skill damage after you get overpowers, which stacks upon itself, and Weapon Master now also granting 30% increased damage to injured and healthy enemies, backstacking into Iron Maelstrom. After that, we've got our change changes for Druid as a class as well, of course, and the major ones here for your active skills are the actual ultimate skill changes. At rank 5, Lacerate is increased by a percentage of your critical strike bonus, Cataclysm slows enemies while it's active now too, and Petrify casts reset all non-ultimate cooldowns, which is a fun unique one there too. Then we move to the passives. Lupine Ferocity now increases all werewolf critical strike damage, which is pretty massive, and also Toxic Claws has been reworked to only affect Shred and Lacerate instead of all werewolf skills, which is honestly a pretty big deal for the class. Then we have Spiritborn Changes, and there are some actual meaningful reworks in here in this patch, rather than just the generic statistical changes they make to these quite often. Specifically, Prickle Skin as an option now gives an increased damage multiplier when you're hit by enemies, and Overload now specifically interacts between storm damage and poisoning, which is quite a neat combo. There's also some unique and legendary changes too, the most notable being that Runeworker's Conduit now scales Lightning Bolt sub-power damage off of your main stat, off of willpower, and that the Mjolnir Ring makes Cataclysm damage benefit from all of your Lightning Bolt bonus effects, so a Lightning Bolt ultimate build for a Druid could absolutely be cropping up from all of this in the future. Then finally there were some Paragon changes too, and in line with their goals of making ultimate skill builds better, Ancestral Guidance now also increases ultimate skill damage pretty dramatically depending on how you use this node. Moving on, then we have changes for the Necromancer class as well. The larger ones as far as active skills are again the changes and upgrades for ultimate skills, Soul Rift itself of course getting a bit of extra care too, and now also drains from bonus enemies if it is draining from a boss. The rank 5 upgrade makes it refill your healing potions, and Supreme Soul Rift has had its stack system reworked a fair amount, honestly. Army of the Dead got a damage increase, a stun aspect, the summoning tag attached, and rank 5 now increases damage by a percentage of your skeleton mage and golem damage bonus. Bloodwave's rank 5 makes it increase by 100% of your damage while healthy and fortified bonuses, and Bone Storm's damage is now increased by 60% of your critical strike damage bonus too. All of these are quite hefty increases, honestly. Then we had some pretty solid aspect changes too, most notably Bloodseekers now also increases Bloodlance crit damage while healthy, and Cadaverous now also boosts ultimate skill damage as well. Moving on from that, we have our Rogue changes in the patch notes, starting off hot with some general Shadow Imbuement enhancements. Now Enhanced Shadow Imbuement no longer specifies injured enemies, it gives you crit chance against any Shadow Imbued enemy, and Blended Shadow Imbuement applies to all sources of Shadow Imbue damage now too, applying Vulnerable much more consistently. As for the ultimate skill changes, the ones that we've seen are that Death Trap now has a pull effect when you first put it down at rank 5, and Rain of Arrows at rank 5 is increased by 100% of your damage to distant enemies bonus, which is unfortunately a bit of a limited one compared to the easy access things like crit damage scaling that Necromancer got a fair bit of. We also have legendary aspect changes and unique items too, and this is where Rogue starts to get a bit more interesting in my opinion. The most meaningful of these being that the aspect of Corruption no longer requires vulnerable enemies, but also just gets a general numerical buff too, and Cruel Sustenance now applies barrier instead of healing, and also Scoundrel's Leather's unique now has an inherent affix that makes trap and grenade skills all count as core skills too. This could honestly make for some quite wacky combos all in itself as a singular change. Then we have our Sorcerer changes for the day as well, with the note that these are intended to add more endgame long-term build options that aren't fully based around either burning or conjurations, as that's what the Sorcerer meta is sort of dominated by right now. There's the pile of ball lightning stuff that we already knew about, and then for active skills it's mostly just the ultimate skill changes too. Deep Freeze at rank 5 is increased by your vulnerable damage stat, Inferno at rank 5 just makes enemies vulnerable while it's active, but Supreme Inferno now also makes all pyromancy skills do 50% more damage while the skill is active, and then Unstable Currents at rank 5 just stuns enemies for 3 seconds on activation, which honestly is relatively tame compared to the other rank 5s. Then we had some passive skill changes too. Shocking Impact now applies lightning damage anytime an effect would stun a boss, which is pretty cool, and Icy Touch is just general vulnerable damage increase now. Then we had some legendary and unique item changes for the class too, most notably the Splintering Energy aspect is now actually attached to Lightning Spear as a skill rather than being its own sort of singular damage source. Gravitational aspect has been entirely reworked and moved to the utility category, now making Ball Lightning pull in close enemies with a damage effect that scales with Ball Lightning itself. After that, we had some really solid Paragon changes too. First, all instances of damage reduction from burning enemies in your Paragon are now listed as damage reduction while healthy, which means that it interacts very strongly with barriers, which the class already focuses. The next biggest one generally is the Ceaseless Conduit Paragon node, which is now just totally different. It gives you 10% increased skill damage if you have any charges, increased by 4% for every 20 intelligence you have up to a maximum, and when you reach full charges, Crackling Energy gets a massive damage bonus until it runs out of charges. as well as a couple of other major paragon node reworks too. Static Surge now gives you a damage increase for 8 seconds after activating the effect, which is much easier to do as well, and Fundamental Release now also increases ultimate skill damage by a portion of your non-physical damage bonus. And that does it for all the class changes, so to wrap it up, let's just talk about the other main changes of note in here too. Nightmare dungeons have a new potential affix to find on the sigils called Elemental Totems. This makes one of 3 different totems spawn in combat. Infernal Hordes compasses now stack on top of each other, so they should only now take 1 slot per wave count in your inventory, so 3 slots total, and gems can now be converted into random, legendary, or unique jewelry items to make up for just how many gem fragments we had in excess in Season 6 as well. Then past that, it was pretty much just fully bug fixes. Feel free to check them all out for yourselves, of course, if you're particularly interested, but that pretty much covers all of the important changes going on in the PTR patch notes for Season 7 as of right now. I hope you've all enjoyed this then. All the classes seem to be getting a bit of love and attention here, but of course, feel free to let us know your own thoughts down in the comments below too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.